Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. There may still be somebody, or there's one or two people joining us, but that's not going to interrupt anybody. So by way of introduction, I'm Dr. Peter Swann. My background is such that I did my undergraduate education at Dartmouth College, then went on to Tufts University School of Medicine. I subsequently completed a residency in family medicine, and I'm board certified in that specialty. I've been in practice for over 20 years, primarily focusing my career on health and wellness and disease prevention, both with patients directly in practice, as well as consulting for large and small companies nationwide on health, safety, wellness programs, and disease prevention programs. With that as a background on me, we're going to start the talk on our probiotics without prebiotics, more harmful than good. To start with, I just want to go over the conflict of interest disclosure. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for ISOThrive. ISOThrive is a biotech company that specializes in making naturally fermented prebiotic soluble fiber using a natural fermentation process that's very similar to the way nature does it when nature is fermenting fermented foods like kimchi or sauerkraut. So it's in essence the healthful portions of fermented food, but without the food. Okay, topics we will cover include types of fiber, health effects of prebiotic soluble fiber, probiotic bacteria and looking at some of the new research on their potential danger, concept called leaky gut and its relationship to Western diseases, foods with prebiotic soluble fiber, prebiotic supplementation, and then evidence that probiotics may not work as advertised. So first, just a definition, probiotics versus prebiotics. Probiotics is what everybody has, pretty much everybody's heard of probiotics. Probiotics are live bacteria. And that term, probiotics, includes both the bacteria you already have inside you, as well as probiotics that you take in food or in supplements. Probiotics are specifically organisms, bacteria, that have been linked to positive health outcomes. Prebiotics, on the other hand, are not live organisms. They're not alive at all. They're food molecules. And those food molecules are typically found in the food supply in certain types of foods. The ones pictured on screen are onion and Jerusalem artichoke. And you also have prebiotic soluble fiber in fermented foods, things like sauerkraut, kimchi, or traditionally fermented sourdough bread. So fiber can be broken into two, insoluble and soluble. Insoluble fiber doesn't dissolve in liquid, in which case if you have a glass of water with an insoluble fiber in it, it'll look cloudy, if you will. That is, it'll look like there's something in there. As opposed to soluble fiber, as the name implies, soluble, it dissolves in liquid, in which case if you have a glass of water with soluble fiber in it, it just looks like a glass of water. Soluble fiber is the important one from a health perspective. That is, insoluble fiber, that's things like Metamucil and bran, provide a bulking effect to the stool, so might help some with constipation, but all the other health properties that fiber is known for all are part of soluble fiber, and a special subset of that fiber that's been called prebiotic soluble fiber. Prebiotic soluble fiber, prebiotics was a term that was coined by Gibson and Roberfroid in 1995. So this is not a brand new concept. The science here has been developing over 20 years. And their definition in its last iteration can be stated as follows. A dietary prebiotic is a selectively fermented ingredient that results in specific changes in the composition and/or activity of the gastrointestinal microbiota, thus conferring benefits upon host health. I might add to everybody, if you could please mute your microphone. And actually, I'll try and do it on this end because I am picking up some noise from somebody. So here we go. There we go. I think I'm able to mute everybody on this end. So that's the definition of prebiotic soluble fiber. How does it work? That is, why are there health benefits from prebiotic soluble fiber? So you eat fiber, either in fermented foods or in plants. It makes it down into the colon. The reason it makes it into the colon rather than being digested in the upper gastrointestinal system is we, that is humans, do not find it necessary to break down prebiotic soluble fiber. Therefore, it passes through the system until it gets to the colon, where it meets the specialized bacteria that ferment those fibers. When they ferment those fibers, they then produce short-chain fatty acids, primarily acetate, butyrate, and propionate. And those short-chain fatty acids are the food for the lining of the colon. In fact, that's all those colon cells eat. They eat the short-chain fatty acids produced by the bacteria. That's important because if the lining cells of the colon are not healthy, then they tend to be leaky. That is, there are structures between cells called tight junctions that loosen up. And that doesn't happen if you feed short-chain fatty acids to the colonic enterocytes. When the colon is well fed, the colon wall then produces substances that are put into the bloodstream, and therefore you can have prebiotic soluble fiber in your diet and have a systemic effect up the liver, the heart, as well as the brain, both through the bloodstream, and the brain is also interacts with the gut through the nervous system, primarily the vagus nerve. There's a big connection directly from the gut up to the brain, so there can be improvements in brain function, things like decreased depression or decreased anxiety as part of improving the microbiome. The other thing that these healthful bacteria do is they produce natural antibiotics called bacteriocins. Natural antibiotics or bacteriocins, when the bacteria produce that, they're really not doing it for us, they're doing it for themselves. That is, this is a way of them keeping the competition down, so it's very narrow spectrum that only their competitors are eliminated. However, their competitors also include our pathogens, things like Salmonella and Campylobacter. And so when you feed the healthy bacteria or healthful bacteria and they produce these bacteriocins, that's beneficial for us as well. So let me briefly mention some of the sort of regulatory health effects of prebiotic soluble fiber. If you want to see actual citations on this, that is actual papers, if you go to our website, www.isothrive.com, and you click on the tab that's for nerds, you'll get a voluminous amount of literature divided by each of these subject health categories and grouped by animal studies versus human studies. So scientific studies have shown the following benefits from prebiotic soluble fiber. Improved regulation of gastrointestinal function, that's things like decreased constipation or decreased diarrhea. Immune system regulation, including decreases in inflammation when the immune system is not functioning appropriately, or a downward trend in the symptoms from autoimmune disease, as well as making the immune system fight against infection better. There's also regulated appetite, and that's especially if you're overweight, and that decrease in appetite obviously can help with weight loss if you're trying to do that. There's an improvement in lipids, including cholesterol and triglycerides, improved calcium and magnesium absorption and bone mineralization. There's a decreased risk of certain cancers, and as I mentioned, the gut-brain axis, there can be improvements in mood. So let's think first about this a little bit evolutionarily. Prebiotic soluble fiber has been in the diet a long time. So prior to the age of agriculture, since the dawn of man, we've been hunter-gatherers. And at that time, as hunter-gatherers, we ate plants. And a lot of those plants were root-type plants, and root-type plants have prebiotic soluble fiber in them. That was the state of nutrition all the way through the beginning of agriculture. Beginning of agriculture, things start changing. We start growing things, we stop moving around, and the things that we grow have to last us till the next harvest. So we have to have some type of food preservation. One of the first food preservation technologies that was developed is fermentation. And if you look in history, pretty much every society that has flourished has had at least one fermented food as a foundation to their nutrition. That continued all the way through the beginnings of the industrial era. About 150 years ago, Pasteur taught us that bugs were bad, invented pasteurization to be able to kill them. The consumption of fermented foods at that point started to decrease, and that decrease sped up in the modern age with the advent of refrigeration and the no longer need to have fermented foods as a way of storing food. As a result, in our diets today, we still get some prebiotic soluble fiber from plants, though not nearly as much as our ancestors did. And the prebiotic soluble fiber that we evolved to expect in fermented foods is, for most people, completely missing from the diet. And there are health consequences to that lack. So let's look at it another way, and that is we as human beings, where do we, not our ancestors, get prebiotic soluble fiber? Starts with breast milk. Breast milk turns out is loaded with galacto-oligosaccharides, galactose chain prebiotics, and that's at the beginning our only source of prebiotic soluble fiber, and it helps our bacteria to mature and change from the time of birth, when there aren't any bacteria in the gastrointestinal tract, all the way through the beginnings of childhood. Then as we age, we get weaned from breast milk, and for the rest of our life, we should be getting prebiotic soluble fiber in two forms, either in plants or in fermented foods. And as I mentioned, certainly in the past that was the case. It's less so today. Today we get, hopefully, enough of the plant type, but most of us are not getting any of the fermented type. So this is an article, a title from Scientific American, where they said, fiber-famished gut microbes linked to poor health. The idea here is that you need to actually feed these bugs fiber, otherwise you can get sick. How does that happen? Well, Justin Sonnenberg at Stanford and Eric Martins at the University of Michigan, two of our research collaborators, have done some elegant experiments showing a couple of important things. The bacteria that eat soluble fiber prefer dietary soluble fiber. That is, they're expecting to get it in the diet. However, they also have enzymes that allow them to digest a secondary food source if there isn't adequate prebiotic soluble fiber. The bad news for us is the secondary food source is the oligosaccharides that form up the mucus lining of the colon. That is, literally, they start feeding on us if we don't feed them. Initially, that causes a gradual degradation of the mucus lining. Eventually, mucus lining is pretty much gone. You get bacteria and bacterial byproducts up against the wall of the colon. Immune system response. Immune system sets up initially local inflammation and then later systemic inflammation. So that's where the whole concept that you may have heard of before called leaky gut. Leaky gut is essentially the tight junctions of the colon no longer being tight, being loose because of the lack of short-chain fatty acids from bacterial fermentation in the colon, and that leaking leads to health problems. What kind of health problems? Well, most of the diseases of Western society have been linked to chronic inflammation, and it is believed by many now that that chronic inflammation has its roots in these changes in our diet that lead to the bacteria not being fed properly. Those diseases include cancer, cardiovascular disease, inflammatory bowel disease, renal disease, arthritis, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, so all the biggies. So let's look at where you get prebiotic soluble fiber specifically. So on this slide, these are items of food that have higher levels per weight of prebiotic soluble fiber, the highest being the two on the left that people pretty much don't eat. That's Jerusalem artichoke and chicory. Most of us don't eat very much of that. And then the others, onion, leek, garlic, are lower than Jerusalem artichoke and chicory. They're sort of intermediate. And then there are other foods that are good sources of prebiotic soluble fiber, but there's not a lot per ounce, so to speak. And that includes whole grains like barley and oats, beans, figs, prunes, sweet potatoes, bananas. So there are quite a number of areas where you can get prebiotic soluble fiber if you're eating a healthy diet. The second type that we've evolved with, though, fermented prebiotic soluble fibers, are typically in fermented foods. And that's, as the picture would imply, a wide variety of vegetables that are fermented or traditionally fermented sourdough bread. If you think of this, fermentation, food fermentation, is a combination of bacteria and yeast together consuming the sugars in the food, and the bacteria knitting those sugars into prebiotic soluble fiber molecules. So it's kind of like bacteria producing food for their cousins, the bacteria in the colon. Kind of food produced by bacteria for bacteria. So in short, it is possible to get adequate daily prebiotic soluble fiber in Western society, but it is difficult. You need multiple servings of the plant-based fibers as well as the fermented fibers to get adequate PSF. So the alternative. Alternative is supplementation. That's the same concept that all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. If you worry that your diet is not good enough and you're not sure you're getting enough vitamins and minerals, you may take a multivitamin. If you think you're not getting enough calcium, then you may take a calcium supplement. The idea being that diet isn't always enough to give you everything you need. In prebiotics, that same possibility exists. Prebiotics have been around for a long time. They're created with a process, different process for different first-generation prebiotics. And to give you an idea of the types that you might see in the marketplace, first are the plant-based prebiotic soluble fibers called fructooligosaccharides. Those are sort of a subset of inulin that's found in plants. The bad news is that the manufacturing process for fructooligosaccharides often leaves a lot of residual fructose, and fructose malabsorption is not an uncommon condition. And if you have fructose intolerance, malabsorption, then you end up getting gas, bloating, cramping from fructooligosaccharides. Galactooligosaccharides are the same fiber that's found in breast milk. And as I mentioned before, for babies, this is great. And it's best through breast milk. However, we didn't evolve to drink breast milk until we're 90. So after you're weaned, I don't think it's at all clear that galactooligosaccharides are the preferred prebiotic soluble fiber. And then you have what I call Frankenfiber. That is, smart researchers have created new molecules in the lab, things that really don't exist in the diet all that much. Things with weird names like xylooligosaccharides. Rounding out the category is industrial isomaltooligosaccharides. The bad news about those is the manufacturing process leaves a very impure product. So you get a product that has a lot of essentially glucose precursors that's broken down and absorbed in the small intestine. So it's kind of like getting a big glucose bomb when you take a supplement that's made with industrial isomaltooligosaccharides. Second generation prebiotic supplements are produced through natural fermentation. As I mentioned before, it's essentially taking the same bacteria and the same process that nature has developed to ferment foods and produce prebiotic fiber but without the food. There is only one second generation prebiotic supplement produced in natural fermentation, and its scientific name is maltoseel isomaltooligosaccharides, MIMO for short. The name, as you probably recognize, is very similar to one on the prior slide, but the end result is actually very different. These molecules are not the same despite their similar names, and maltoseel isomaltooligosaccharides through fermentation ends up being a very pure, very potent product that is very digestion resistant and doesn't lead to the glucose spikes that I mentioned on the prior slide. So let's talk a little bit about probiotics. This is a an article from Fortune magazine in May of 2016, and the title of it was "Probiotics Are a Waste of Money, Study Finds." Let's examine a little bit how they came to that title. So, the first hurdle for probiotics, which I remind you are living bacteria, and they only help you if they're living in your colon, they need to survive the basic supply chain. That is, they're manufactured somewhere, then they're transported, then they're packaged, then they're transported, they get a wholesaler, they're a transporter, they get a retailer. That whole process is at minimum weeks and oftentimes months before they sit on the shelf waiting for you to buy them, where they may sit for more weeks and months. So by the time you buy them, they've been around for a while. They're supposed to be alive. They don't necessarily have any air, water, or nutrients. So that can be difficult on any living organism. That's not just my opinion, by the way. The manufacturers actually know this. So this is the supplement facts requested or required by the FDA for one of the best-selling probiotics on the market, Align. If you'll notice, I've underlined in yellow, they guarantee that at the time of manufacture, each capsule will contain at least 1 billion live bacteria, and they further guarantee that at the time of consumption by the best buy date, there will be at least 1 million left. So it starts with 1 billion. By the time it gets to you, it's 1 million. If you do the math on that, billion to million means 99% of the bacteria that started in that capsule are dead by the time they get to you. And this is not my words. This is taken right from the manufacturer's supplement facts. Now, let's say some bacteria are alive, and indeed, as we saw in the last slide, there may be at least 1 million left. Well, now they have some other hurdles. You take them into the gastrointestinal tract, that is through the mouth, the esophagus. First thing they hit is the stomach. Stomach's filled with hydrochloric acid at a pH of 1 to 3, and it's really sort of designed to kill bacteria. At the same time, they start being hit by digestive enzymes, and as they leave the stomach, they enter the small intestine. The pH skyrockets from 2 up to 8, and they get hit with another battery of digestive enzymes, all designed to break them down. So a number of reasons why it makes it a little bit hard to believe that probiotics taken orally make it all the way into the colon and set up residence and do what they're supposed to do. That is, remember that the premise of probiotics is that you're sending in live bacteria that are setting up house and producing short-chain fatty acids and helping keep you healthy. So the other reason for the title on the Fortune magazine article was referring to this article in Genome Medicine that came out in 2016. And it was a systematic review of the randomized controlled trials of probiotic supplementation to try and achieve a change in the bacteria of the colon. Systematic review is sort of the best of the best. It takes all the best studies and puts them all together to come up with a solid conclusion based on the best science available. The result of this systematic review is towards the bottom of the slide. This systematic review of the pertinent literature demonstrates a lack of evidence for an impact of probiotics on fecal microbiota composition in healthy adults. Their words, not mine. So, if probiotics work, they aren't working, at least there's no evidence that they're working through changing the microbiome, changing the bacteria in the colon. Perhaps they have another mechanism for their action that is as yet undiscovered. Also remind you of what we talked about before. If you believe that probiotics work and you're taking them, you really need to take prebiotics at the same time. Remember, probiotics are organisms that, if they can't get dietary fiber, will begin eating the mucus lining of the colon. So sending down a whole bunch more hungry wolves without sending them down some food is probably not a good idea unless you want to be the food. So, in conclusion, you need to get adequate prebiotic soluble fiber every day, both plant-based and fermented. The plant-based it comes best through whole and preferably uncooked plants like onion, garlic, and leek. Why uncooked? Because cooking does decrease the prebiotic soluble fiber content. Next, daily fermented foods, kimchi, sauerkraut, and ideally if you're getting all your prebiotic soluble fiber from food, you should be having multiple servings of these things a day, both the plants and the fermented foods. Alternatively is a daily supplement. In my opinion, fermented MIMO, maltosol isomalto oligosaccharide, is the preferred, is the best, as being the most pure and the best tolerated with the best side effect profile. That's not just my opinion. Recently, John Selling, that is Dr. John Selling at Stanford Medical School, recommended ISOThrive as safe and effective, and he's an associate professor of medicine and gastroenterology at Stanford. In addition, Jumpstart MD, which is the largest and leading weight loss and wellness practice in the Bay Area, started using ISOThrive in their clinical practice on a daily basis. For the physicians who might be on the call, because I did invite some colleagues, I just want to think about this briefly as sort of clinical indications. That is, how do I think about this when I'm in the exam room with a patient? So first, pretty much all patients could benefit. There's a wide variety of health benefits. There really isn't anybody that it's contraindicated in. If you're looking for specific indications, digestive issues like constipation and diarrhea, and that's all prebiotics would theoretically help those. And then if you're using a second-generation fermented prebiotic, if your patient has gas or bloating or cramping or symptoms suggestive of irritable bowel, second-generation fermented prebiotics might be a good addition, but I wouldn't use the first generations. If your patient is overweight or obese and is looking to lose weight, patients with conditions characterized by chronic inflammation, that includes metabolic syndrome, diabetes, coronary artery disease, inflammatory arthritis, inflammatory bowel, allergies, etc. Also, patients with high cholesterol and or triglycerides, low levels of bone mineralization, known as osteopenia or osteoporosis, as well as when you're giving patients antibiotics. Remember, antibiotics that we use are typically pretty broad spectrum. They kill a lot of bugs, and that includes a lot of the bugs that are in your colon, in which case it's helpful to be taking a prebiotic soluble fiber to give the healthful bacteria adequate nutrition to get them to rebound after the antibiotics are gone, help them to replenish themselves. Okay, that pretty much sums up the talk. There is an area on your screen where you can submit questions, so please don't hesitate. I'll pause for a second while people are doing that, and then I'll handle as many of the questions as I can in the remaining time. Okay, so a few questions have come in. Let's see. Where can I get more information on the health benefits of prebiotics? As I mentioned on our web page, there is a tab for nerds, and that has a nice synopsis of lots of articles that one could peruse. Okay, another question: where can I get ISOThrive? I'm gonna dodge that question for the time being. I don't want this to be, just one commercial. If you email me that question, and my email address is on the screen, I'll address that directly with you. Okay, do prebiotics have side effects? As I think I mentioned in the talk, first-generation prebiotics side effects are not uncommon, and they're gastrointestinal side effects. That's things like gas, bloating, cramping, abdominal pain. Second-generation prebiotics do not have that side effect profile. Other than gastrointestinal, though, prebiotics don't have any side effects outside the gastrointestinal realm. See if there's any others coming through. Oh, question about how is prebiotic soluble fiber different from Metamucil or Psyllium, that is other fiber products. And as I hope I mentioned, soluble fiber can be divided into prebiotic soluble fiber and other soluble fiber. Prebiotic soluble fiber is the kind that has all the health benefits. Other soluble fiber and insoluble fiber are basically just bulking agents. So Metamucil, Psyllium help to bulk the stool, but not much beyond that from a health standpoint. Okay, so here's another one. Does this mean that sauerkraut, for example, is good because it has prebiotics and not because it has probiotics? And my opinion on that is that that's a correct statement. We have all been taught that probiotics are good, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. But for all the reasons that I mentioned in the talk, they got to make it into the colon alive. If you have good bacteria in a fermented food, for instance, even if it doesn't make it in alive, that bug that made the fermented food probably created some prebiotic molecules, in which case I believe that all the health properties that we attribute to fermented foods is because of their prebiotic content, not because of their live probiotic bacteria. It's a great question. Okay, I don't see any other questions coming across, so we will conclude the talk. We will be sending to you a link to the recorded presentation so you can review it at your leisure, as well as other hopefully useful information. Thank you very much for attending.